A sitting Republican congressman, a former Republican congressman, and a prominent Republican strategist react with frustration and rage over their party's antics regarding their defeat on Friday, and it's glorious and we have to enjoy it. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bell before you go. I'd greatly appreciate it. All right, friends, as a reminder, Friday was a rough day for the Republican Party on numerous fronts, starting with the fact that they can no longer hold the threat of a government shutdown over the heads of the American people. So after repeatedly bringing us to the brink of a painful and unnecessary government shutdown over the past 6 to 8 months, Republicans were finally forced to swallow a $1.2 trillion spending package, which will keep the government funded for the next 6 months. And far-right Republicans are furious. Then Marjorie Taylor Greene, in response to that, began the process of potentially removing Mike Johnson from the speakership. And then another Republican congressman, Mike Gallagher, another so-called moderate, has decided to leave Congress, not just seek re-election, but leave Congress early before his term ends. And he's timed the resignation in such a way that MAGA Republicans will not be able to fill his seat. And so it will keep that Republican margin razor thin, putting them in a really tough spot. All of that's so good. And we have some clips to play in which various Republicans react to it. Now, I'm going to start with the current Republican congressman, a guy named Mike Lawler from New York. This is him on the Fox Propaganda Network, weighing in on some of Friday's developments.
Thoughts on what she's done here?
Look, Marjorie supported Kevin McCarthy, so she understands how chaotic and destructive it is to vacate the chair. When Matt Gaetz and 7 other Republicans teamed up with 208 Democrats to remove Speaker McCarthy, they created chaos and really were destructive to the Congress, to the institution. And so I think this is unnecessary. I think it's idiotic, frankly. And I think it does nothing to actually advance the conservative movement or serve the American people. The bottom line is we're in a divided government. We're not going to get everything we want. Chuck Schumer is the Senate Majority Leader. Joe Biden is the president. The only way to really advance the conservative movement is to win elections. And doing stunts like this actually undermines our ability to win elections.
Well, probably get her reelected, though.
Sure, in an R+30. Yeah. But you know what? The difference between having a Republican majority and not is seats like mine. Joe Biden won my district by 10 points. So, my voters understand me. I'm running against an avowed socialist, Mondaire Jones, who supports defunding the police, open borders, and the like. But it doesn't help the conference, and it certainly doesn't help the country when we engage in this inter-party.
So listen, I'm not a big fan of Mike Lawler, right? Because he still voted to formalize the impeachment inquiry into President Biden. I think he also cowardly did not support the bipartisan border bill after Donald Trump made his objections to it known simply for cynical political reasons. This guy is not exactly a stalwart statesman. He's obviously saner than Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, Matt Gaetz, et cetera, and so forth, but that's a pretty low bar. So from a conservative perspective, which I don't share, but I can at least understand in theory, everything Mike Lawler said made sense. Listen, as I've said on this channel, Republicans narrowly control one chamber of one branch of Congress. And these far-right Republicans, the Freedom Caucus, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and others, they represent a sliver, a fraction of that narrow majority of one chamber of one branch. And they want to impose their will on the American people, on President Biden, on Senate Democrats, on House Democrats, and even very often Senate Republicans who oppose them. It's insane. They want to be the tail that wags the dog. It's stupid. It's foolish. You might be able to get a couple of concessions, but the idea that this is going to be a 50-50 or you're going to get your own way or mostly your own way is insane. That's it. You have no leverage. You are in the weaker position. Mike Johnson, for all of the terrible values and policies he supports, he understands that. So does Kevin McCarthy. The math is against him. Of course, again, I have no sympathy because Mike Johnson and Kevin McCarthy actively contributed to the derangement which animates the Republican Party, which has made them crazy and irrational and dysfunctional. So again, no sympathy from me, but this result was inevitable. And I think Lawler also has a point where Marjorie Taylor Greene thinks the MAGA agenda not only is the totality of the Republican Party, and it's certainly the driving force, don't get me wrong, but it's not the totality. And even if it were, it would only be the totality of one political party. They stupidly believe that the MAGA agenda is what the American people as a whole want, when it's simply not true, and it's never been borne out in the electoral results or the polling for that matter. So, as Mike Lawler points out, you need moderate, sane Republicans, especially as the American people becomes fed up. Somebody who also understands that is a former Republican congressman, Trey Gowdy, who, by the way, again, is no hero. He has said some good things since he's left Congress about how ridiculously extreme the Republican Party has become. I would also add that he was one of the grand inquisitors of the Benghazi witch hunt against Secretary Hillary Clinton. So again, he has contributed to the extremism in his party, but he's out of office now, and so he's been considerably more blunt. He is fed up with what happened on Friday and the Republicans' response to it.
Rich, all you got to do is look back to November, the November midterms where the House Republicans underperformed. Look back to Georgia. And what was that, 2021? Two Georgia Republican senators were defeated. So if you're wondering why you're trying to negotiate against Chuck Schumer and Joe Biden, it's because Republicans can't pick the right candidate and they can't win elections. And now the margin is what? Razor thin in the House. They're on the verge of losing the House. You want to see a bad budget bill? Let the Democrats control the House, the Senate, and the White House. They got nobody to blame but themselves for picking the wrong candidates, running bad races, and losing winnable elections.
And he goes on like that. I mean, he is fired up. And again, I love it because a lot of it, again, from just cynical electoral propositions is true. And Republicans do deserve, especially elected Republican officials, deserve to be excoriated for the stupidity and inability to govern. You also have Republican strategist, prominent Republican strategist, Mark Thiessen, who I do not like, but he was also on the Fox Propaganda Network, and he is also not mincing words. By the way, this person here, I think it's Molly Hemingway, if I'm not mistaken. I just recognize her. I don't see what the chyron is. She is unhinged. If you ever see her on Twitter, she's an election denier, Trump supporter. She has a smug look on her face. I wish I could find the clip of her reaction to what Mark Thiessen is about to say, because I imagine intuitively it runs in complete contrast to what she believes in her heart, because she is a MAGA extremist herself. Mark Thiessen, again, not a fan of the guy, but he is much more of an establishment Republican than someone like Hemingway and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Donald Trump.
Let's start right across the block there. Are we going to have another few weeks of trying to elect a speaker, or what happens?
God help us. The House Republican majority is a dysfunctional embarrassment. I mean, Speaker Johnson didn't ask for this job. He stepped up when the House couldn't elect a replacement for Kevin McCarthy. He's trying to manage an unmanageable conference. Republicans need to understand that they control one half of one branch of government, and now they're going to control it by one vote. You can't impose your will on the entire government when you have one half of one branch of government with one vote. If you want, I want to cut spending too. I want to do all these things. If you want to do that, there's a simple way to do it: win elections. Don't nominate lunatics. Get people who can actually win a general election, not just a Republican primary. Take back the Senate. Take back the White House. That's how Biden got the spending through. So that's how, if we want to cut the spending, that's how you get to do it. You can't do it by having this internal chaos.
He's right. Again, I very bluntly put, and also the thing that he added there at the end, which we've also talked about in this channel, the Republican political apparatus is currently incentivized in a way that's just counterintuitive. So to win a Republican primary, or rather to increase your chances of winning a Republican primary, the first step in winning a race is you have to be as extreme as possible. That's the general rule in the age of Trump. Be as Trumpy and Trump-like and Trump-sycophantic as possible. Generally speaking, that will help you in the primary. And you have to win the primary to run in the general. But to win the general, generally speaking, you have to be pretty far from Trump, because most Americans don't like Trump's vision of the Republican Party and the American people. This election-denying authoritarian cult of personality. So it's hilarious. It's like, in order to complete step one, you have to run as far from reason as possible. Then in order to potentially win the general, you have to run back as close to reason as possible. And that's a lot of distance to cover in a relative short amount of time. But again, they created the incentive structure. And I would argue Mark Thiessen as well has contributed to it as well, because he should have been more vociferously oppositional to Donald Trump and his extremism along the way. But Thiessen and Gowdy and even Mike Lawler, these people who are, try to style themselves now is more moderate, rational Republicans. They either actively contributed to it or they sat by and allowed it to happen. So again, no sympathy whatsoever. I delight in their misery and despair. You made your bed. Now you can sleep in it. Let me know what you think in the comments.